it's so simple and yet powerful to know that that's what this is. This is what we're doing. We're enabling people to manage chronic conditions more effectively outside of the healthcare facility, and they're able to do things that they really want.
We have to change the specific narrative of what rural America is. Incorporating this type of technology is really going to be a game changer because, as I quoted over and over again, your zip code should never, ever determine your healthcare outcomes, period.
All right. Hello, everyone. Hi, Christopher. Hi, Michael. Hi, Anthony. It's nice to have you with us today. Just for some introductions to get everyone started. Today on the podcast episode, we have Michael Archuleta, the Chief Information Officer of Mount San Rafael Hospital. He's a visionary in using health tech to improve hospital outcomes with multiple awards for efficient technology integration under his belt. We also got Dr. Christopher Tignanelli, the Chief Medical Officer of Biometrico Health, a practicing trauma surgeon at the University of Minnesota, and a nationally recognized leader in surgical AI, digital health, and data-driven care. And finally, Anthony Dan, the founder and CEO of Biometrico Health, with over 15 years of experience in driving business optimization and now working to provide a unified remote patient monitoring platform. And so, with all that, I guess we'd like to get started in the order I introduced you all. What led you all to the health tech space? What led you to this area? Why is it that you're passionate about this and driving, making change in this area?
Yeah, absolutely. So, in the end, I've always come out to the point of always stating that your zip code should never determine your healthcare outcomes, period. Living in rural America, I firsthand saw, how at times we can create this overall life or death barrier, which I knew that technology had the power to really close those specific gaps. We knew that the incorporation of technology could really improve on better outcomes moving forward. And again, I've always stated that your zip code should never determine your healthcare outcomes. And the reason why I state that always is because when you look at some of the numbers in rural America, rural Americans die at a rate roughly 20% higher than urban dwellers, which is not the number we basically want to see. So again, bringing in innovation into rural America is such a critical element moving forward. Incorporating technology as a core component, seeing how technology has really increased and improved on patients' lives moving forward has been really a big driver for myself. And this is why I'm in this field moving forward.
Yeah, it's great. And yeah, I think the whole topic of, outcomes in the rural areas are going to be a big topic of our conversation today. So, good to hear that you're passionate about that and definitely a lot more to speak about that later. So, Chris, on to you. What led you to the space?
So I actually came to the space from two different directions. So I always knew since I was like 13 years old that I wanted to be in medicine and be a doctor. When my mom got diagnosed with cancer, I've been like laser focused in seventh grade to go to medical school. But in undergrad, I actually became a bioinformatics major, and I was actually the first ever graduate at William and Mary in Virginia in bioinformatics. And that really, introduced me to these computational approaches that I began thinking, how can they be applied when I go into medical school? When I joined the University of Minnesota, I joined our healthcare natural language processing and biomedical AI lab, which is great because I had some background in the bioinformatics space. I also got a master's degree there. And that's where I really saw firsthand this untapped potential for AI to just transform care. My focus has really been on reducing medical error, which right now is the fourth leading cause of death in the United States and in the US. So it really allows me to like translate between different disciplines. There's the data science, informatics, clinical decision support, implementation science piece, which is all that tech side. And then there's also I'm a trauma surgeon, and I also do surgical critical care as well, and that's kind of the clinical side. And it's great being able to kind of sit in between that and broker, research and innovation, kind of right across the tech into the healthcare space.
Yeah, and that's really a space that I'm quite familiar with, and that's something that Health Engine really fits into very well. A lot of the companies we work with and a lot of the people on our team are very, very interested in this intersection between technology, business, and technology and healthcare and what we can do with it. Great. Anthony, finally, on to you.
Okay, dude. So I was really born into it. I had a challenging chronic illness that was a birth defect with my ability to digest food called annular pancreas. It was misdiagnosed, undiagnosed for about 15 and a half years, and Mayo Clinic gave me a life-saving surgery at 16. So then I was really in a situation where I was constantly in and out of hospitals, always dealing and being a part of the healthcare system. And I also saw what the apex of medicine can accomplish. The second one of its kind, surgery at Mayo Clinic, gave me a complete new lease on life. I completed my high school in about 2 years, went on to become an entrepreneurship major, and one of the first kids to graduate from the Schultz School of Entrepreneurship, which was a $50 million grant from the founder of Best Buy. And then from there, I went on to co-found a healthcare finance company and pursue the ability to really enable hospitals and health systems to financially operate effectively. So for me, it really is about the power of medicine, how healthcare is really part of everyone's life, and how you can be someone that can make a difference. And I know that people made choices to make a difference in medicine, and I'm here because of that. So for me to be on the business side, that's something that's been an honor and pleasure to do and be a part of.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of benefit that healthcare has provided, but also so many problems with the system. And it's great to see like there are people like you who are really willing to fight and make that change and drive to make those changes through things like Biometrica. So I think one of the key things we need to talk about today is RPM. It's a big part of a remote patient monitoring, right? That is essentially what Biometrica does, and it's really changing how we view healthcare and how healthcare affects people today. So RPM is often described as a clinical force multiplier. First off, what is all of your interpretation of like how RPM benefits the our overall healthcare system? What does being a clinical force multiplier mean to you? And what do you perceive as the most transformative effects of RPM? And so anyone feel free to take this. Feel free to talk to each other about it as well.
I'm happy to go from the clinical side of things. So RPM is one of the problems that healthcare has had is that most care that people have gotten, or almost all care, just happens either in the hospital or in a clinic, like an office building that you go to. And RPM allows us to extend clinical care beyond those settings. It allows us to capture physiologic and patient data while they're at home, where patients spend most of their life. So that's really, I think, where it becomes that real force multiplier because it turns our current model of care is very like episodic when someone comes in to the clinic or the hospital, but now it becomes reactive. I'm sorry, now it becomes proactive. Sorry about that. It's continuous. You're continually collecting data on patients every day. So, as a surgeon, critical care doctor, I've seen just how much deterioration happens between visits. RPM lets us, like right now, it just lets us catch the signals early and it lets us intervene before a patient shows up in the ED or the ICU. But looking ahead at the future, from the informatics standpoint, I mean, that's a real time data stream, and that enables or can enable intelligent triage, risk prediction, personalized recovery pathways. So once you start putting all of those things together, what the future potential of RPM is, we're going to see better outcomes, more efficient use of clinicians, and data that drives smarter care. So that's why I personally believe that RPM is probably one of the most transformative tools in modern healthcare. And at Biometrica Health, that's exactly the future that we're building.
And I absolutely love that too, Chris. I love how you stated that it really turns episodic medicine into proactive medicine. I think that's so critical, especially for patients who really live far away from the hospital itself. Professionally, I think this really gives our teams the real time insights into specific risks, as you stated. Looking at that complete view of that specific patient, it's such a critical thing. I mean, we've always heard this buzzword, the in home hospital, putting in the specific tools into place. We know that RPM isn't just basically a gadget, it's really a continuous connected care initiative to really improve on better patient care outcomes. And I think I've always stated this since day one is that as a technology leader, if we do not build strong asynchronous tools that benefit our patients both inside and outside of the organization, we are not being successful, period. That's basically the bottom line. And personally, it also represents equity. It gives rural patients the same level of oversights someone in Denver or any bigger metro specific area would basically have. So bringing this type of technology, especially into the rural settings, it's a major game changer moving forward.
Just to echo that, I think we have so many advancements in technology in many different industries, and healthcare sometimes has lagged. And what RPM can really be is to what Mike was saying, well, it can be an equalizer, and it can be elevating us through that technology to finally bridge that gap of where people are having conversations about their health and being aware of their health, not just see at their annual physical, but it's an ongoing process of where they know that their health is making a difference, and technology is enabling them to do that.
I want to add one more thing to that too. So excellent points there too, Anthony. You know, we look at this industry itself. I mean, unfortunately, the healthcare industry is one of the most antiquated industries out there. That's a fact. That's basically a fact. The finance industry, the oil and gas industry, they're many more years ahead of the curve when it comes to digital transformation. And that is a shame because we are doing the most important thing out there, and that's dealing with human lives. That is such a really critical item. We really need to be the ones leading the pack with digital transformation, innovation, really changing that overall perspective. So I did a discussion with Columbia University, and we were talking about the brick and mortar theology of healthcare, on how healthcare has really been built on that specific theology versus looking at hospitals and clinics as being actually technology companies that deliver healthcare services. We have to change that specific mindset, really incorporate the importance of what technology really brings, because it is it's a hard specific cultural item to say that technology needs to be a core element into your overall organizational strategy. Because what have they always seen technology as? As a cost center. They've always pointed technology as being a cost center versus seeing it as a revenue contributor versus seeing it as a specific element that can potentially improve on better patient care outcomes. Those specific initiatives really have to be incorporated to the success of any organization, period.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and to
I think
build,
sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying to build on that. I mean, just your comment on the brick and mortar, like by extending care to home, like I think like in the data science space, like when we build AI models, we used to do everything so centralized and everything's federated, let's spread things out. And I think we're going to start seeing federation in healthcare. We're going to see like federated healthcare delivery. Like imagine instead of going to your primary care doctor, the day you just do it at home, a box shows up at your house, packaged very fancy. Open it up. It's like a Stitch Fix box. You open it up. It's got a bunch of devices. You scan the QR code. You log in. You meet with the doctor. Like, all right, I want to check your vitals. Pick up the blood pressure cuff. Run it. I got the little auscultator. Put it here. I can hear it. Okay, put it here. I can hear it. Prick your finger. Put your finger in. Send that into the lab. Get your lab work. You just do primary care visits. Right from the comfort of your own home. And I really think that we're going to start seeing a huge shift of healthcare outside of just the hospitals. Mhm.
Yeah, I think that paradigm shift in how healthcare really views and interacts with technology is very vital for like the advancement of healthcare outcomes as we go forward. And I think the brick and mortar theology that you spoke about, Mike, is definitely a big part of why we see poor outcomes today. And so we know that RPM has a lot of potential, and all of you mentioned all these amazing things that are possible with it. Um, Aside from maybe just the existing brick and mortar theology of how we do healthcare today, what do you think some other barriers are that need to be broken down in order to really support this paradigm shift and help RPM scale through America, really make it a large part of our system?
That's an excellent question. I think again, when we talk about business cases and the need for these specific services, is really showing what are the current outcomes. How can we use this technology to improve on better patient care outcomes, which is so important. So, for example, if you come into a smaller rural hospital, like one nurse might be supporting dozens of patients across multiple roles, okay? Because you figure we wear multiple hats in rural America. But I think when you look at RPM, that same nurse could really monitor an entire high risk population from a single view. So then you're creating these good business initiatives that state that there is critical outcomes for utilizing these services. Because even when we talk about like artificial intelligence, we basically say we are doing more with less in healthcare. How do we create better automation points? How do we create specific items that have been manual processes into automation processes? Showing those specific use cases and showing the benefits is extremely critical, because any project that we basically throw into effect is there has to be an enhancement of better patient care. Because I've always stated this is I don't care what your specific role is in healthcare. We all have a new CEO, and that new CEO is a patient. And that's basically the bottom line. And again, if we, as technology leaders, as clinical leaders, do not focus on the needs of the patients, then we're not going to basically be a successful organization moving forward. So, incorporating this type of innovation, showing the reason for it, showing the justification of this is how we're planning on enhancing, this is on how we're planning on reducing manual processes, on improving our specific population outcome and utilizing this technology, that's a big win moving forward for anyone.
Something else I'd like
Anthony,
to thank you.
absolutely.
I,
Yeah,
I,
I'd love to hear from you on this as someone trying to like sell and provide, expand the scope of RPM. What are the challenges that you think really need to be overcome?
so one of the historical challenges, and those challenges is actually melting away. It historically has been reimbursement, the ability, the reimbursement model of how we have healthcare set up in this country. It it has a direct impact on behavior, on how healthcare is delivered, and the health outcomes of those patients. So CMS 26, that's the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, has actually reduced the minimum threshold to achieve reimbursement from 16 readings a month to 2, and that's Medicare. So this is a tremendous breakthrough to know that reimbursement is getting easier. They're making it more obtainable, and Medicare's figuring it out. They're realizing that they can care for more patients with less money if they incentivize proactive care from the provider and awareness from the patient. So it's extremely positive, exciting direction for anyone that's in the RPM world and really is cares about improving the health of chronic conditions with Americans here.
And just to build on that, I mean, yeah, reimbursement for RPM is getting better, but it's still not perfect. I still think that there are portions that are still not appropriately aligned with actual costs. Like for example, fetal monitoring. We'd love to launch a fetal monitoring remote program within Biometrica Health, but you know how much the remote fetal monitoring, the FDA approved remote fetal monitoring devices cost? Over $1,000. And how much can you bill for with RPM? It's in a couple $100 a month. So those numbers don't fully align. So there's still, I think, some work to be done on the reimbursement front. But as Anthony mentioned, it's absolutely getting better. Used to need 16 readings a month, which is great for diseases that need to be monitored that frequently. But like hyperlipidemia, this is one that cardiologists ask me about all the time. Like, when's Biometrica going to have lipid monitoring for people with high cholesterol? Well, it doesn't really make sense to check your cholesterol 16 times a month. But now, every 2 weeks, now that's a use case that can be extended to RPM with the new model coming in a few weeks. Just to add a few other barriers, I think there's still infrastructure gaps, especially in rural areas. So broadband coverage, for example, and cell signaling. So I'll give you an example of a real biometrical patient. So we have a patient, we have blood pressure cuffs that we put on patients for high blood pressure monitoring. This patient lived in, and they're cellular enabled. This patient lived in an area that didn't have good coverage, and unfortunately, we weren't able to do RPM on that patient because of infrastructure gaps in our country. Um, And then another big one, I think, is really interoperability. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done for building systems that can interoperably plug in the 30 plus EHRs that exist across our country. I think those are some of the big gaps.
I actually
You know,
wanted to touch
Christopher,
on.
I
Go for
want
it.
to add one statement to that. So interoperability, that has been such a buzzword for quite some time, with these systems really having issues of communication, especially when you come into these smaller organizations that unfortunately can't afford these larger electronic medical record systems. So then, of course, it becomes an actual barrier when you're trying to send those continuity of care documentations out to different organizations. So again, that is a huge barrier and a specific item that we all need to continue to basically improve. I think a lot of these specific EHR vendors have really, stated, hey, we need to create a specific strong form language. I don't know if you're familiar with FHIR, FHIR, which is the Fast Healthcare Interoperability resource coming out of the HL7 group. But, a standard specific language where we could basically share information as seamless as possible is such a critical element. There is a lot of forefront in regards to what we're doing with this, but there is still barriers with this specific process in place.
Yeah, this whole conversation on interoperability actually leads me perfectly into where I wanted to go next. With the whole the idea that healthcare data is very fragmented and it's very hard to just make things work together and have a very seamless plug and play system. And so I kind of wanted to ask for all of y'all's opinion on what does good data infrastructure look like in the next 5 years? Whether that's how data infrastructure matters for the RPM platform itself, how it matters for clinical support, maybe from Chris, you can speak about that, or from Mike, how it impacts hospital operations. What do you think good data infrastructure, like what changes and what programs and processes do you think are we going to see or are necessary in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, Mike just hit on one of the big ones. I mean, I think we need universal adoption of FHIR. And FHIR is more like I try to describe FHIR as like it's like a universal adapter for like outlets. If you think of like plug-in outlets in different countries and stuff, FHIR is like a universal adapter. So that allows us to communicate. If we say blood pressure, allows us to communicate some concept of blood pressure across different systems. But then within that, there's also how do you define the concept of blood pressure? So then you get on these things like common data models. A big one is OMOP. So I really think we need universal adoption of FHIR and OMOP. I think would be two big things that would help move us forward nationally for improving our data infrastructure. Um, we also need real-time data availability. That's a big thing that in Biometrica Health with our data feed that we have to make sure is that it's a real-time data feed so that clinical decisions can be made on that data. And then also needs to be bi-directional. Can't just be unidirectional. We need data from health systems. Health systems need data from our system in order for both ends to deliver optimal care. And there's some barriers right now with doing that. With especially with HIPAA and regulations, health systems might not be as open to allowing data flowing outside of the electronic health record, for example. So, we need to really think about what are the safest and best ways to set up those systems for success.
I love that. To Chris's point there too is we need one unified patient story. That's basically the bottom line. I want inpatient data. I want clinical data. I want home data. I want AI insights and trends into a single interface. That is what we basically need to go to. Now, no toggling, no hunting, clean, integrated, intelligent data at the point of care is such a critical element that we basically need because, as I stated, having that one unified patient story, that makes a life of difference. And that is going to be a massive game changer of utilizing all of this specific data to create better patient care outcomes moving forward into the future.
And
I
you think
couldn't.
that's the EHR? What do you kind of think? Where do you think that single place would be?
Well, I don't know if the EHR, I mean, there's a lot of talks in especially between, Epic, Oracle Health, in regards to this, but a data depository, even some of these health information exchange programs, saying, hey, where are we basically going to reside this specific data? Who's going to be the governing board of all of this structured data that can basically be shared? I mean, there's a lot of discussions that still need to take place in this. The thing is your EHR isn't the end all be all either.
Yeah.
There has to be more specific initiatives and more thought process with what we're planning on doing.
Yeah, I think I heard it said once that your average EHR, and you would know best as a CIO, but your average health system EHR has you have about 1,500 vendors that you got plugged into an EHR, and of those 1,500 vendors, do they all centralize a lot of their data in the EHR, or I bet some of it's fragmented across all of these different systems.
Oh, absolutely, Chris. I mean, there's a lot of fragmented data across multiple systems, and I think that's why the future does look very positive too, with everything really happening in this overall industry currently right now. But getting to that unified patient story, that one specific view, is really going to be a major game changer. And you being a physician, I think would see a lot of benefit in regards to seeing the complete story of that
Oh
specific
yeah.
patient going from our facility to a higher level of care. Having that complete view is really what we need.
I, I that is a great challenge, and I think that I can tell you that Biometrica is doing its part by being a device agnostic platform and being able to take all of these disparate devices and make it so that the provider only has one integration and has access to all of that data on a simple, easily assemblable dashboard, and be able to take that information and employ it directly to empower them to care for their patients better. So there's a lot of work that still needs to be done, but my hope is that there's going to be more companies like Biometrica out there, which is making lives for the providers and patients easier.
Yeah, I think definitely getting like one centralized place for data and even for all your devices is, I think, the biggest challenge right now. And of course, EHRs just aren't good enough. But we're seeing improvement, and I think this is like it's very promising. And I think with technologies like Biometrica being developed right now, I think hopefully we can all see better outcomes. Being me as a patient, you as a CIO, CEO, and a clinician. I think I did want to touch a little bit more on kind of the future on how we view devices and device integrations. As we work to make things more integrated, obviously RPM is becoming a system level effort beyond just, hey, let's make sure this specific device um, has certain capabilities and can help with RPM. How do you see this more system level transformation playing out? And I guess the bigger question is, how do you see big players in the devices industry moving to adapt to this transformation?
I can tell you that we're having a lot of we were a device company at one point, and then we pivoted to being a platform, and that was a lot of it to do with just about the amount of investment and time it takes in the devices themselves, and then going through all the FDA process to get them up to that regulatory process with the US. But I can say that a lot of the technology, if I was a big device company, I would be I would have some reservations, and I would be looking to maybe partner with phone companies, because a lot of the in the longer term, medium to longer term, a lot of the technology that's being used is coming back to the phone, and the phone is becoming more and more of a tool what is it when you have a pocket knife, basically, where you can do all sorts of different things,
Swiss blade
and
knife.
it right. So it's and that's so I was if I was a big device company, I'd be trying to partner with phone companies or something and trying to get ahead of it, because it's a lot is going to come back to the patient's phone. And that's great for us because we have an app, we work with any device. So we know how we can ride that wave effectively. But what I think is so exciting is that you can do respiratory, you can do blood pressure, you can even do glucose monitoring all through your phone, through the camera aperture and the light source on the phone.
And I think going even further on the devices, like the devices alone, they don't reduce readmissions. It's the insights, whether it's an AI, some AI algorithms that you're running off of that device data, and it's the workflow integration. Our When we talk about clinical decision support, we talk about like the five rights of the clinical decision support. Like, is the right information getting to the clinician at the right time, through the right medium, et cetera, things like that. So, how do you integrate that? Are you telling a provider, when they need to know that someone has an elevated blood pressure? Or, is it just going in an email and they're not seeing it till 3 days later and it's too late, for example? So I think one of the things that we're really focusing on Biometrica is beyond just, integrating a lot of different devices onto the platform, but also that next level of adding in the insights and a lot of work on how do we optimize this into workflow, working with our partner clinicians.
And I think you touched on something there with AI adoption and how we can use that to get these insights. The insights are the things that really matter, and making sure that we have these diagnostic, or not diagnostic, but data analysis tools built into our platforms, built into our services to really get those insights. That's really important. And I think one thing that I really want to touch on here, given that you being a clinician at an academic health system and Mike leading a rural hospital health system, what are the differences in AI adoption and the pace of innovation, key goals, like monetary and financial concerns? How are those different in these different, different kinds of health systems, and how do those play out in the adoption of this technology? And so it's really just a chance for you two to speak on, how your areas of expertise are similar or different, and also what these types of systems can learn from each other, where they converge, and then what Biometrica, Health Engine, or other founders in the space can take away from these kinds of insights.
You know,
Mike,
I
do you want to go first?
Yeah,
Or yeah.
absolutely. I think the thing is rural hospitals really have the ability, clarity, and the deep connections to the community. I think that's really critical itself. As a, and I really don't like using the word rural because, you know, as a rural organization, we still have to meet all the specific same regulations as these bigger academic systems, these bigger health systems, but we basically have to do it at a very smaller scale. As I stated, we're doing more with less. How do we basically innovate? I think rural America, especially progressive healthcare organizations like ours, have really seen the importance of incorporating technology as that core component because we see that these specific solutions work. We see that they improve on better patient care outcomes. We've seen that this is basically allowing us to really change that narrative that your zip code should never determine your overall healthcare outcomes. That is so important. And again, academic systems have scale, they have research infrastructure and specialization, versus again with the smaller organizations, it's very hard to bring in that specific type of talent. I think that's why we also focus a lot on, telehealth initiatives, because trying to bring in specialized physicians into a rural area becomes a little bit difficult because, not many individuals want to basically move into rural America itself. But, in the world of complexity, complexity is definitely the enemy. In the end, we basically just need a solution that works out of the box. And I think that's what makes the biggest difference with Biometrica is that this specific solution works. That's where it comes down to. This is an innovative company that has seen the importance of incorporating strong technology outcomes, the use of artificial intelligence, the use of really looking at rural America and seeing that we have deep connections to the overall community, showing that your zip code should never determine your healthcare outcomes, using that technology to innovate, to excel, to improve on better patient care outcomes is number one. And that's why we continue to basically move forward. And I think that's really the biggest difference. Again, we're a very innovative organization. If you've seen us, we're a multiple Most Wired winner, which is a top nationally recognized healthcare IT award given to the top facilities making the most progress of health IT. We're a HIMSS Analytics Stage 6 facility. That's a feat that only 34% of US hospitals basically hit. And we continue to really show that just because we're a smaller entity, we don't act like a smaller entity. But it really takes the backing and the strong business partnership initiatives like groups from Biometrica to really make a difference, because there is a huge difference in regards to a business partner and an actual vendor. And this organization is always looking for business partners and not vendors moving forward on that.
And from the on the academic health center side, I think Mike really kind of highlighted when he said that his organization is looking for a lot of solutions that are kind of ready right out of the box. And we do a lot of research. We'll work with a lot of version 0.1s, for example. That's kind of what a lot of our mission is the mission to do research and to innovate, to get grants. So a lot of what we'll do is, and we do have departments of biomedical informatics, departments of biostatistics, implementation science, human computer interaction, usability studies. So we do have experts in that space. So we'll do a lot of foundational work to develop new technologies and even do lots of pilots. So we'll do kind of prospective studies of these tools before they're really ready for scale. They're not commercial grade or industry grade yet. They still have some kinks in them. And that's why we do it as part of a research study to really find out how do we optimize it so that the next step could be getting FDA approval, really making an industry grade, and then scaling it across the country. And a lot of the work that we do at University of Minnesota and other academic centers is really focused in that space. And I think that's also a real big opportunity for health tech companies. When they're looking, where can we partner to really refine our product? I think academic health centers are a great place to partner. You can come in, you're a health tech company, you need access to patients, you need access to EHR and workflow, you need insights from their teams. We have a whole team that will sit down with you. It's a patient experience team, and they will walk through these different aspects of it. And we have our usability team that'll sit down and talk about usability, and our workflow integration team. So you can get a lot of insights, and you're kind of looking for your alpha customer. The risk, you lose some equity in that, but I think the benefits are very large for those companies.
And I do want to hear a little bit about, where do you think these systems can really learn from each other and like what changes can we possibly make in the way that the technology is adopted um, to drive improvements, both in the academic side of things and in the rural, like in the hospital side of things with, patients in rural America.
One thing would love to learn from Mike and the rural systems is just radical simplicity. Like doing stuff at University of Minnesota, you have tickets and much bureaucracy and different teams and such. And I think that when you're at a smaller single system without everything's got to be enterprise system solution because you have multiple hospitals and such. But when we work in a single system, I think you're much more efficient. You could do things a lot quicker because I think we have a lot of shared goals, better outcomes, fewer unnecessary hospitalizations, more efficient care, things like that. But I think there's a lot that we can learn from the rural systems.
And Chris, as you stated there too, I know we could definitely learn from one another, and there's always importance for both sides. I think academic systems could really again learn from real innovation. How we move quickly, how we remove a lot of the layers of complexity, as you were basically stating. And really focus on outcomes over optics. And I think that's really a critical element. Again, the larger health systems, there's so many tickets, so many committees, so many specific layers, it becomes very difficult at times to say, how are we truly driving those innovations? Where you come into rural America, yes, we're meeting all the same requirements that are basically needed by these health systems, but we move a lot quicker. We could basically remove all of these layers of complexities to say, hey, let's bring in these specific startups, or hey, let's bring in these innovative ideas that could create better care outcomes moving forward. And again, with innovation, one thing with innovation is you want to basically learn from everything that you do. Even if that means you fail quickly, you move forward, you learn from those specific mistakes, and you improve on the better care outcomes moving forward. So again, there is definitely a lot to learn from both sides.
That's great. And I think this like continued communication and collaboration, in spaces like these, it's great to see this to help, really improve outcomes everywhere in healthcare. I think we're going to start moving towards kind of the last couple sections, last couple topics I really wanted to touch on. One thing I did want to really get from all of you is hearing some sort of patient stories or hearing some stories about how people have responded to RPM and what changes it's really driven that you have seen. Chris, I know you kind of touched on this with when you're talking about some of the drawbacks, but I feel like all of you have experience in the space and enough to talk about, the ways that you've really seen it help and support in specific cases. And so I'd love to hear, any of you, maybe Anthony, you can start us off on how we've seen it really benefit and,
Yeah,
some
I can
stories.
think of there was I'll just say his name was George, and he was a patient of one of our first pilot sites and in Jacksonville, Florida. And it was so refreshing. He would be using checking his blood pressure 2 3 times a day, and no one had to really tell him. He just knew that this was how he was going to have an opportunity to be there for his grandkids, was through this blood pressure device. And it for him, this was the blood pressure device, and taking his blood pressure meant he get to be with his grandkids. And I thought that was just, it's so simple and yet powerful to know that that's what this is. This is what we're doing. We're enabling people to manage chronic conditions more effectively outside of the healthcare facility, and they're able to do things that they really want, like be there for their grandkids. So that to me, it just, it lightens my heart, and it just energizes me to know that um, that our service is providing that kind of meaningful impact.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
great. Um, yeah. Sorry, go
I
ahead.
was just
Could-
gonna
Sorry.
say, yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that it's really empowering people to to grab their own healthcare by the horns and take control of it, rather than just be like, well, I'll just go in and see the doctor and have my blood pressure checked then. And a lot of people get white coat syndrome. They get a higher blood pressure when they're in clinic, and this allows us to get more accurate numbers. And the doctors that we work with are really happy with it because it allows them to see how their patients are doing, it allows them to reach out to them more frequently, it allows them to save some future visits. They can call in and just be like, "Hey, your blood pressure's been pretty high for the last 5 days. What's going on? Oh, it's real. You weren't exercising during this. Okay. Well, we're going to increase your beta blocker dose, for example." And you just save them a visit. You save them from going, potentially 5 months until they came back into clinic to be like, "Oh, okay, this dose was too low. I got to raise your medicine." Now you just did it, 1 month after they started them on the medicine. You found the optimal dose.
And, we know that hypertension is really significantly higher in rural America. I mean, that is specific factual data, and not only is it, more common, but it's more often uncontrolled. And I think that becomes an actual issue. And it's not because people don't care about their overall health, it's because access to like consistent monitoring and timely follow up is harder. And again, this is where RPM completely changes that specific story, that narrative. As I stated, we have to change the specific narrative of what rural America is. Incorporating this type of technology is really going to be a game changer because, as I quoted over and over again, your zip code should never, ever determine your healthcare outcomes, period.
Yeah, Mike, I'm sure you see this a lot, but like I've had patients come into clinic and I asked them like, "Oh, where are you from?" And they're like, "Oh, I'm from northern Minnesota. We had to drive 4 hours to come into the university and see you, and we had to stay at a hotel room just to come in for like a 20-minute clinic visit." Like, and I bet there's a lot of people like, "Well, I'm not going to do it. I'll see a doctor if I get sick or something," and don't come in for
Exactly.
routine care because of it.
100%.
Great. Yeah, thank you for that. I think it's always great to have sort of like, more like, or not more, but it's always great to in these kind of episodes to do like some real stories, maybe talk about people's background, people beyond your background, how we've seen technology really affect people. And I guess one last thing I really want to touch on is, we hope to make this a resource for people who are interested in the health tech space, potentially founders, people who want to start a company one day in the area, or just people who want to learn more. And so I think all of you have worked to some extent on pilot projects in some way, perhaps even with each other. And so what advice do you have for founders or for, even for hospital, the people in a hospital system about making the most of a pilot project beyond just, on the founder side, securing one and on the hospital side, like making sure it's worth your time. What advice do you have for making the most out of it? And then, secondly, what are some of the biggest misconceptions or poor pieces of advice you've heard about selling into hospital systems?
I might touch on that one first. I say the first thing is find a champion, someone within that facility that sees the value and the opportunity that whatever service you're coming in to provide can make, and then make it really easy for that facility and that champion to advocate for your service within that facility. And then I would say, people might say there's a misconception that it takes a long time to implement everything. That's not a misconception. It always takes longer than you think, regardless if it's whatever the size of the facility might be. So I would say choose a project or a business that you're passionate about, that you really believe in, because you're going to need that passion to help guide and push that initiative through, because it really comes from within to really make a difference in the healthcare world, because it change is a challenge, and in being able to advocate effectively within the organization to really see it through.
I absolutely love that. I think, understanding the human workflow before you write a line of code, understanding that I think is extremely critical. And I've always said this too on I've worked with multiple startups, very successful startups, and I've always stated that if it works in rural America, it will work anywhere. Period. So understanding those specific aspects and understanding that human element, that's really going to be a game changer for these individuals trying to kind of make a mark in this overall market itself.
I completely agree with Mike. You gotta have the workflow ironed out. You gotta have clinician buy-in on the workflow. And I agree with Anthony. Getting a stakeholder is really important on getting in and getting a pilot with a health system. I think it's also important to understand how health systems make decisions. You got to get through. You got to get the CFO's ability to sign off on it. It's got to make financial sense. You need the CIO's sign off on it. It needs to make it needs to make IT sense. We'll just say. But then you need your clinician leaders. You need to have, if it's a trauma decision support system, you need the trauma medical director, trauma program manager, et cetera, to kind of sign off. So you got to, healthcare is made by, we kind of talked about committee before, but a single decision to bring a vendor in, you got to kind of cover a couple different bases. So really make sure that you have those different stakeholders from different pools. You're going to have the highest chance of success in getting a pilot. Now, pilots in general, I heard a really interesting thing when our CIO was giving a talk. He talked about pilotitis. He said that hospitals are getting a little sick of all of these pilots, especially pilots that just don't scale. I think it's important for people to understand that pilots come with some high upfront integration costs. If you need to integrate into the EHR to do a pilot, well, that means that even if you do it free of charge to hospital, they still need to take developers and so forth from their IT team to actually do some of those integrations. You got to get IT approval, security reviews. You got to train clinicians. So I think if I was going to pitch a pilot or give advice to a health tech company on how to pitch a pilot, again, I'd go back to what I said earlier: partner with the health system, or even two, right away. Yeah, you'll give up some equity, but now it's a win-win, and your chance of getting a pilot is going to be so much more successful. They're going to be more bought in. They'll be a reference customer for you. They'll help you optimize that workflow. They got access to thousands of clinicians that can help provide feedback, et cetera. So yeah, so that's and then the other thing was on misconceptions. I think one misconception that some health tech startups um, maybe missed or whatnot is they focus a lot on the sales aspect, and they kind of forget about research. You can actually de-risk your solutions through academic research. You could generate revenue, non-dilutive revenue for your company through research. So I actually sit in the NIH. I'm on study section for something called SBIRs. These are NIH grants that they give to companies, and companies can come in. They can apply for a phase 1 or phase 2 grant. They can get millions of dollars from the NIH, and there's other agencies. BARDA is another good one that gives out lots of money. AHRQ, DoD, Gates Foundation, Wellcome Fund, ARPA-H. But you can apply for these SBIRs. For the phase one, you just need an idea. So you don't even need to have any proof of concept or anything. You literally need an idea. You write it up, you submit it to an NIH SBIR, and if they approve it, you get a little over $250,000 with no dilution to go and start developing your solution. So I think, in Biometrica, we actually have a chief scientific officer, and this is a part that just as we have our sales strategy and all of that, we also have our whole research strategy and academic strategy as well.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that was a lot of great advice. I really appreciate it. I think people watching this will also definitely appreciate all the insight from, all the various areas that y'all are coming from. Um, I think all of this is all very, very valuable to founders, just people who want to learn more about the space. And I think that wraps up time. We're coming to the end of our conversation. Thank you all so much for joining me for this. I think it's been very, very insightful, very fun to just hear from all of you on your thoughts, your experiences, and your stories. And yeah, I really loved it. Thank you all.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much.